Racist security harasses Black CEO on plane. She takes down their $600 million deal with one call. Harleen Walker strode confidently through the crowded terminal, her heels clicking against the polished floors. She was a woman on a mission. Her team close behind, all of them focused on the deal of a lifetime. The $600 million contract with Sky Tech Inc. could be the stepping stone to expanding her company into uncharted territories. As the CEO of a successful Black-owned business, this was more than just a financial victory. It was a personal triumph. The deal was set, and she could already see the future unfolding, but as she moved toward the gate, something felt off. The usual bustle of the airport had an eerie edge to it, an unspoken tension that Harleen couldn't shake. She had been here countless times, always with the same routine. But today was different. The security officers standing near the gate kept glancing in her direction, their stares lingering a little too long. Harleen's practiced gaze moved away from them, but she couldn't ignore the growing discomfort. She adjusted the strap of her handbag, keeping her posture composed. She'd faced worse in her career, subtle racism that came in the form of cold stares, condescending remarks, and whispered doubts about her capabilities. But this felt more deliberate. "Excuse me, ma'am," a voice broke through her thoughts, sharp and firm. Harleen turned to face a tall security officer, his uniform slightly disheveled, but his attitude was all business. "Yes?" she asked, her voice calm but measured. "Can I see your identification, please?" the officer said, his eyes scanning her up and down, making no effort to hide his scrutiny. "Of course," Harleen replied, her voice steady. She reached into her bag, pulling out her ID and boarding pass, handing them over without hesitation. The officer took them with an air of indifference, glancing at the card before looking back at her, his gaze still critical. "I'll need to verify your boarding pass, ma'am. Just a moment." Harleen's brow furrowed, but she said nothing. She'd been through security countless times and knew the drill. She wasn't one to cause a scene, but she felt the irritation rising. Her team stood off to the side, exchanging confused glances, but none dared approach. They knew better than to intervene, at least for now. The officer's hand hovered over the scanner, then hovered again as he stared at her, his eyes narrowing as if searching for something she wasn't willing to give. "Everything all right?" Harleen asked, her tone slipping into sharpness. "Oh, it's just procedure, ma'am," the officer replied. But there was a subtle edge to his words now. It wasn't just procedure. Harleen had seen that look before. She knew exactly what was going on. She crossed her arms, looking the officer in the eye. "Is there a problem with my ID?" The officer hesitated, his eyes flicking to the other security personnel standing a few feet away, before looking back at her. "No, ma'am, just making sure everything's in order." "Right," Harleen said, her patience thinning. "You've already seen my boarding pass and my ID. Everything is in order." The officer nodded, handing her back the documents with a strained smile. "Thank you for your patience." Harleen took the papers back, her hands steady despite the anger bubbling beneath her calm exterior. She turned away, heading toward the boarding gate with a practiced nonchalance, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she had just been treated differently, like she was the one who didn't belong here. As she walked, she could feel the eyes of the security team following her every move. It wasn't the first time she'd been made to feel like an outsider, in spaces where she was clearly the equal of anyone around her, but it stung all the same. She had worked too hard to get to this point, to prove her worth in an industry that constantly tried to make her feel lesser, only to be reduced to nothing more than suspicion because of her skin color. She gritted her teeth but kept walking. This was just the beginning, she told herself. One deal, one flight, one day, she could handle this. But deep down, something told her that this wasn't the last time the spotlight would fall on her, in a way that would make her fight for more than just a seat at the table. The gate agents called for priority boarding, and Harleen was the first to rise. She ignored the officer's eyes still trained on her, and she walked toward the plane with her head held high. But in her mind, the seeds of doubt were already taking root. Harleen had barely settled into her seat on the plane when the familiar voice of the flight attendant came over the intercom, signaling that they were preparing for takeoff. But before the doors could close, Harleen's peace was shattered once again. A sharp knock on the cabin door drew her attention. Two security officers, standing rigidly, stepped into the aisle, their eyes scanning the passengers before settling on Harleen. She felt the familiar rush of tension flood her chest. "Ma'am," one of the officers said, his tone colder than before, "we need to see your identification once more." Harleen exhaled slowly, trying to maintain her composure. "I've shown it to you twice already," she replied, her voice calm but firm. "Is there a problem?" The officer didn't respond right away. Instead, he exchanged a glance with his partner, who stood by the door, watching the scene unfold. "We need to verify your information again, ma'am," the officer said, his words clipped, a clear challenge in his voice. Harleen could feel her patience slipping, but she reached into her bag again, producing her ID and boarding pass. She handed them over without a second thought, her jaw clenched. The officer took the documents, scanning them briefly before handing them back, yet he didn't move. The silence in the cabin felt suffocating. All eyes were on her now. Passengers whispered among themselves, glancing her way. The tension was palpable. "It seems there's an issue," the officer said, his voice growing louder, now for the entire cabin to hear. "We suspect you may be a flight risk." Harleen's eyes widened, a flash of disbelief crossing her face. "Excuse me," she demanded, her voice rising slightly, a mix of frustration and confusion. "What are you talking about? I've done nothing wrong." Her team, still seated a few rows away, stood up, clearly alarmed. "What's going on?" "Here," one of them asked, stepping toward the aisle. The second officer, who had been silent until now, turned to them. "Please remain seated," he snapped, raising his hand to stop them from approaching. "This is a matter of security. We're escorting this passenger off the plane." Harleen's heart pounded in her chest. This wasn't happening. Not after everything she'd worked for, not after everything she'd built. She could feel the weight of the situation. Her dignity, her career, and the eyes of the passengers all trained on her. But this wasn't about security. It was about something else entirely. "I'm not going anywhere," Harleen said, her voice steady but fierce, locking eyes with the officers. "You have no right to treat me like this." One of the officers took a step forward, his hand extended toward her. "Ma'am, we'll have to remove you from the flight." Harleen's team was now at her side, urging the officers to reconsider, but the officers weren't listening. The second officer's grip tightened on her arm as he motioned for her to stand. This was no longer just an inconvenience, it was a public humiliation. As she stood, her mind raced, but she kept her face composed. She wouldn't let them see her break. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction. The other passengers watched in stunned silence, some looking away, others staring at Harleen with a mixture of discomfort and disbelief. The officers, however, continued their harassment, their focus, never leaving her as they escorted her off the plane. And in that moment, Harleen knew. She knew this was no simple misunderstanding. This was a deliberate attempt to intimidate her, to push her out of a space she belonged in. The injustice of it all hit her like a punch to the gut, but instead of crumbling, she felt something else, something stronger. This wasn't the end, not by a long shot. The cold, sterile airport air hit Harleen's face like a slap as she was led through the terminal by the officers. Her team trailed behind her, looking as powerless as she felt. The hum of the crowd and the murmurs of surprise around her barely registered as she focused on putting one foot in front of the other. The humiliation burned, but she forced it down. There would be no breakdown, not in front of them. When the officers finally let go of her arm, she was left standing in the corner of the airport, separated from her team. The whole ordeal had been over in minutes, but it felt like hours. Harleen took a deep breath, her mind racing. The moment her feet hit the terminal, she knew the headlines would follow. Her phone buzzed in her bag. One glance at the screen told her everything she needed to know. News outlets were already picking up the story. Racial profiling at the airport. Her stomach tightened. The words burned her. This wasn't just an inconvenience. This was an attack. They had tried to force her off a plane, accusing her of being a flight risk just because of her skin. She found an empty corner, away from the chaos, and allowed herself a moment of quiet. She leaned against the wall, closing her eyes for a brief second. Her mind swirled with anger, frustration, and that familiar sting of injustice. How many times had she faced this? How many times had her talent, her hard work, her success been overshadowed by people who saw her as something less? She thought back to all the late nights, the sleepless hours she had spent building her company from the ground up. Every deal, every pitch, every dollar earned had been hard fought. But no matter how high she climbed, the roadblocks remained. No matter how much she achieved, there were always people who looked at her and saw only her race. Harleen stood taller, pushing the emotions aside. The deal she had been on her way to finalize, $600 million, the kind of game-changing contract her company had worked so hard for, now hung in the balance. She knew that the media would spin this however they wanted. It could tarnish her reputation, undermine the months of work she'd put in, and disrupt everything she'd fought to achieve. She clenched her fists at her sides. No, she wouldn't. Let this setback define her. Not this time. Not when everything she'd worked for was on the line. Taking a deep breath, she reached for her phone. She had a call to make. The press could say what they wanted. The world could spin this however they wanted. But Harleen wasn't going to let this moment break her, not when she had the power to make them regret ever underestimating her. This would be just another challenge to overcome, another battle to fight, and this time the fight would be on her terms. Harleen's hand trembled slightly as she dialed the number. She didn't have to think about it. It wasn't a question anymore. It wasn't about her pride or reputation. It was about respect, about standing firm in the face of the constant indignities she had endured, about sending a message that there were consequences for what had just happened to her. The phone rang twice before Mark Williams, her top lawyer, picked up. Harleen. His voice was familiar, always calm, but she could sense the urgency. He knew something had happened. Mark, I need you to prepare the paperwork to cancel the deal with the tech company. The $600 million deal, Harleen's voice, was steady, but there was an edge to it now. I want it gone. Pull the plug. She paused, letting the weight of the decision settle in. It wasn't a decision she had come to lightly. She could hear the shock in Mark's voice as he spoke. Are you sure about this? I know how much this deal means to you and your company. It's a game changer. Harleen's grip tightened on the phone. This is bigger than that. This is about respect, about what just happened to me. I will not stand by and let this company benefit from my work while they allow that kind of behavior to happen. I want them to feel it. Mark was silent for a moment, and Harleen could practically hear him processing the weight of her words. He knew this could ruin the company's reputation. It would be a devastating blow, financially and publicly, but that didn't matter. Not now? Understood, he said at last. I'll get started on the paperwork right away. But Harleen, you realize the fallout from this could be massive, right? I know, she said, her voice unwavering. I'm not backing down. It's about time these companies realize that actions have consequences. If they can't respect me as a person, they don't get to benefit from my work. The words felt good, coming out of her mouth. A mix of anger and liberation rolled over her like a wave, pushing aside the lingering frustration she'd felt all afternoon. This wasn't just about a corporate deal anymore. It was about taking control of the narrative, about not letting the injustice slide, even when it seemed like the world was set up against her. Harleen took a deep breath, trying to push back the tension in her shoulders. You have my authorization. Do whatever it takes to get it done. I'll handle it, Mark confirmed. I'll keep you updated as I move forward. Good. Harleen's voice was resolute. And make sure they know it's not about the money, it's about their conduct. Tell them it's the last time I'll ever let anyone disrespect me like this. The call ended, and for a moment, Harleen just stood there, the phone still in her hand, the weight of her decision settling over her. She wasn't just making a statement to the company. She was making a statement to every person, every organization, every entity that thought they could belittle her, her hard work, or her integrity because of the color of her skin. She had been patient, forgiving, understanding, but no more. Harleen took a deep breath, her gaze steady and unflinching. No one would ever forget the power of her resolve. And this time they would remember the lesson. Harleen sat in the quiet corner of the airport lounge, her eyes scanning the terminal as her phone buzzed incessantly in her hand. The first message was from her assistant, Chloe, asking if there was anything she could do to assist with the fallout. The next was from her CFO, Jackson, urging her to reconsider the deal, citing the potential impact on their company's future. Another from her PR team, requesting a statement to mitigate the damage. The messages kept coming, each one more urgent than the last. Harleen's fingers hovered over the screen, contemplating the responses. She didn't have time for backpedaling or softening her stance. The moment for apologies had passed. As she deleted the last message, her phone buzzed again. This time it was a call. Harleen glanced at the screen and saw the caller ID, the CEO of the tech company. Her heart rate didn't falter. She was already prepared for this moment. With a deep breath, she answered. "Harleen, it's James." The voice on the other end was smooth, practiced. "I'm sure you're aware of the situation and I want to apologize. What happened today was unacceptable. I'm personally looking into it. Please, reconsider your decision. We value your partnership too much to lose it over this." Harleen closed her eyes for a brief second, her mind already calculating the next steps. She had heard these words before, time and time again. Apologies, promises of change, but always with the underlying intention of smoothing things over without truly addressing the root of the problem. It wasn't about fixing the system. It was about protecting their business. "James," she began, her tone firm but composed, "I'm not interested in apologies. I'm not interested in your offers of exclusivity or partnership deals. What I'm interested in is accountability. You've shown me exactly who you are today, and I can't ignore that." She could feel the hesitation in his voice as he stammered. "I understand your anger, Harleen, but we're willing to do whatever it takes to make this right. I'll personally ensure that security undergoes extensive diversity training and—" Harleen cut him off, her voice cool but resolute. "It's too late for training, James. This isn't about one incident. It's about a pattern that runs deep, one that you've clearly been comfortable with for far too long. You don't get to buy your way out of this with a partnership. The deal is off." There was a brief silence on the other end, and Harleen could almost hear James weighing his options. The reality was clear to him now. He wasn't going to talk her down. "Harleen, I'm asking you to reconsider," he pleaded, his voice laced with desperation. "This could ruin everything. The company's future, your future, everything." "Then maybe it should," Harleen said, her voice hardening. "I've worked my entire life to get where I am, and I won't let anyone degrade me just to make a profit. You want to make it right? Hold your officers accountable. Start with them. You want to change, then make real changes, not just words." Another silence, but this one felt final. Harleen could tell the conversation was over, that James knew he wasn't going to get what he wanted. She'd made her decision, and nothing would change it. "I'll have my lawyer handle the paperwork," Harleen added, her voice unwavering. "The deal is done." The line went dead. She didn't need to say anything else. There would be no negotiation, no second chances. Harleen had taken her power back. As soon as the call ended, her phone buzzed again. This time it was Mark Williams, her lawyer. "Harleen, I've got the cancellation paperwork ready to go. We'll hit them hard," Mark said without preamble. Harleen stood, straightening her jacket. "Do it. I'm done playing their game." The power of influence wasn't in the deals, the partnerships, or the money. It was in knowing when to walk away, when to take a stand, and say enough was enough. Harleen had made her mark, and now she was going to ensure the world knew it. The news hit the media with a force that Harleen couldn't have predicted. Headlines blared across every major news outlet. "Black CEO cancels $600 million deal over racist security incident." The story was everywhere. Some celebrated her for standing up to systemic racism, applauding her courage and resilience. Others, however, were quick to criticize her, calling her actions vindictive and destructive to the business world. The comment section of every article was divided, with voices praising her strength and others questioning her motives. In the days that followed, the company she had walked away from entered full damage control mode. Press conferences, public apologies, and promises of future action filled their social media feeds. But it was too late for any of that. The damage had already been done. Harleen's phone rang non-stop. Her assistant, Chloe, was overwhelmed, juggling endless requests for interviews and statements. But Harleen wasn't interested in clearing her name or justifying her actions. She wasn't trying to make anyone happy. This was about something bigger. "Screw them, Chloe, I'm not backing down," she muttered, glancing at the series of missed calls from board members and investors. The weight of the fallout was heavy, but Harleen didn't flinch. If anything, she stood taller. As much as she could feel the pressure building, her resolve only hardened. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for every black professional who'd ever been unfairly scrutinized or disrespected. For the first time, she wasn't worried about the money. She was worried about the principle, the message it sent about where she drew her line. Her social media feeds were flooded with messages of support, some from strangers, others from the likes of prominent black leaders and executives who offered words of encouragement, solidarity, and praise. One message stood out. "You did what we all wish we could. You've got our back, and we've got yours." It was from Simone Harris, CEO of a global tech company and a longtime friend. Harleen smiled, feeling the power of the community around her. Still, the messages from her investors were starting to flood in, and the pressure to keep her company stable became more apparent by the hour. "We're getting a lot of heat from the investors," Jackson, her CFO, said during a private call. "We need a public statement, Harleen, something to soften the impact." "Tell them I'll speak when I'm ready," Harleen replied, her tone calm but firm. "This is about more than their bottom line, Jackson. It's about being seen, it's about being heard. I'm not going to play their game anymore." The pressure was mounting, but Harleen was unshaken. The stories were out there, the debates were raging, but in the midst of it all, she felt a quiet sense of empowerment. People were paying attention, people were listening, and that was the most important thing of all. As the public backlash continued, Harleen stood at the center of it, not shrinking, not retreating, but confronting the storm. Head on. Her actions had rattled the corporate world, and they weren't going to forget this anytime soon. The pressure on Harleen had been steadily mounting, but now it felt suffocating. The board of directors called an emergency meeting, and Harleen knew what was coming. As soon as she entered the conference room, their cold stares greeted her. "Harleen," began David, the chairman of the board, his tone smooth but firm, "we need to talk about the cancellation. You've made a powerful statement, but the reality is that statement is costing us millions. The company is already feeling the heat, and we can't afford to lose this deal." She met his gaze, her face unreadable. "I don't give a damn about the money, David." "That's easy for you to say," he shot back. "You've built a company worth billions, but not all of us are in the same position. You're putting us at risk. Your personal beliefs, however righteous, cannot dictate our business strategy." Harleen felt a surge of frustration, but she held it in. She'd been down this road before, being told to compartmentalize her identity, to separate who she was from what she did. But this time was different. This wasn't just about a deal. It was about a principle she would no longer compromise. "You don't understand," she said, her voice steady but laced with emotion. "This isn't just about business, it's about respect. The security officers who harassed me, the treatment I've endured my entire career, that's not something I can just ignore. It's a matter of dignity." Another board member, Karen, shifted in her seat. "Harleen, we know what happened to you was wrong, but we're telling you this is bigger than one incident. If you keep this course, it will tarnish your reputation, your company's image. People don't want to mix personal grievances with business decisions. You think this is personal?" Harleen's voice cracked slightly, though she quickly regained control. "This is about every black person who has been humiliated, dismissed, and belittled in this industry. This is about the system that is set up to keep us in our place. I've had enough, and if that costs me the company, so be it." David's voice softened but held a note of warning. "We're all concerned about what happens next. The fallout could be catastrophic, but we can't ignore the fact that business is business. And personal matters, no matter how justified, have no place in this conversation." Harleen felt the weight of their words, but she couldn't back down. She'd spent her entire life fighting for her place at the table, and now, after all the pain, all the struggle, she wasn't going to let them tell her that compromise was the only way forward. She stood up, her gaze unwavering. "I'm not making this decision out of spite. I'm making it because I'm tired of pretending like my dignity isn't worth something. I'm tired of pretending that black lives only matter when they're convenient. I'm standing up for what's right, not for what's profitable." The room fell silent, the tension palpable. Harleen's words hung in the air, and for a moment it felt like the weight of the world was pressing down on her shoulders. The board members exchanged glances, but no one spoke. Finally, David cleared his throat. "You've made your position clear. We'll reconvene and discuss our next steps." Harleen nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew this wasn't over. The fight had only just begun. As she left the room, her mind raced. The battle between corporate interests and personal integrity was intensifying, but she wasn't backing down. Not now, not ever. Harleen had made her stand, but what she didn't expect was the full force of the wave it would create. In the days following the cancellation, the fallout was immediate and fierce. News outlets picked up the story, spinning it into a narrative of corporate racism and retaliation. Harleen's name became synonymous with defiance, a symbol of standing up to injustice. It didn't take long for the ripple effect to take shape. Other companies that had previously been in negotiations with the tech giant began pulling out of their own deals. Contracts were put on hold, partnerships were abandoned. One by one, corporate giants distanced themselves from the tech company. A few even issued public statements condemning the actions of their former partner, although none were as bold as Harleen's. Her phone buzzed constantly with updates, some from old colleagues, others from people she'd never met, all expressing support. "You've changed the game," one message read. "Thank you for standing up for us." Another, from a black business leader she admired, said, "This is bigger than just one deal. You've set a precedent. Keep going." But it wasn't just people in her corner. The other side was loud too. Critics accused her of using her power for vengeance, of putting business interests above the need for a reasonable response. Some said she was ruining her own company. Others questioned if she had gone too far. But none of that mattered. The decision had been made, and Harleen wasn't about to let public opinion sway her now. Meanwhile, the tech company was feeling the strain. Harleen had been the catalyst, but the rest was beyond their control. Reports came in that the company's stock price had dropped significantly. Analysts were quick to point out the financial impact of Harleen's actions, noting the massive contracts that had suddenly disappeared. The CEO of the tech company, once confident in his ability to contain the damage, now found himself scrambling. But it wasn't just about money anymore. A viral movement had emerged, with hashtags like "Did Justice for Harleen" and "Each Racist Corporation" trending across social media. People were demanding accountability, and Harleen's story had become a rallying cry for change. Videos, articles, and personal testimonies flooded the internet. It wasn't just about her now. It was about a larger fight for justice, fairness, and respect. At first, Harleen had only wanted to fight back against the personal wrong done to her, but now, as she scrolled through the endless messages of support, she realized that what had started as a personal battle was becoming something much bigger. She was no longer just fighting for herself. She was fighting for every black professional who had been denied dignity in the workplace, every person who had faced discrimination without the platform or power to do something about it. For the first time in days, Harleen allowed herself a moment of reflection. The ripple effect she'd sparked wasn't just about the cancellation of one deal. It was a movement, a shift in how corporate America viewed and treated its black leaders. And though it was hard, though it felt like a battle she couldn't win at times, Harleen knew one thing for sure. She would never back down. Not now, not ever. Weeks had passed since the fallout, but Harleen's resolve never wavered. The media storm had begun to die down, but the pressure on the tech company was still mounting. The stock price continued to drop, and the company's reputation was in tatters. It wasn't just the money, they were losing something more important: public trust. Then one morning, Harleen's phone buzzed with an incoming call. The name on the screen was one she had been expecting, though she hadn't anticipated when it would come. The CEO of the tech company. "Harleen," his voice was low and sincere, "I'm calling to apologize. I was wrong, and I've seen the damage this incident has caused. It's clear that we need to do better." Harleen didn't answer immediately, letting his words hang in the air. She had heard apologies before, but this was different. This wasn't. just a half-hearted attempt to get back in her good graces. She could hear the weight of regret in his tone. "I know you don't owe me anything," he continued, "but I'm committed to making real changes. We'll be implementing new security policies, and we've already started working on a diversity and inclusion overhaul. We understand that this is bigger than a single incident. I want to fix this." Harleen sat still, listening, processing. His words weren't lost on her. She had always known that the corporate world ran on appearances, but the true test of his sincerity would come with actions, not words. "You understand that this isn't just about a policy change," Harleen said, her voice measured but firm. "This isn't a quick fix. It's about creating a culture of accountability. I need to see real change, not just in your protocols, but in your people. We're talking about more than a business deal. It's about respect for every black professional who's been discriminated against." "I hear you," he said, clearly taking in every word. "That's why I want to invite you to be a part of this process. If you're willing, we'd like you to sit on the committee that will guide these changes. Your voice needs to be heard." Harleen paused for a long moment, considering his offer. This was the moment of truth, not just for the tech company, but for herself. She wasn't sure how far the company was willing to go, but she knew that if she agreed to this, she would have an opportunity to ensure the reforms were not just superficial, but meaningful. "I'll meet with you," she said, her voice resolute. "But I want a seat at the table. I want to be a part of this from the inside. This isn't just about fixing your company, it's about fixing the system." He agreed without hesitation, and they set up a meeting for the following week. The agreement wasn't perfect. Harleen knew it would take time to see the changes take effect, but it was a start. For the first time since the incident, Harleen allowed herself to feel a flicker of hope. The fight wasn't over, but she had taken the first step toward making real, lasting change. When the press release went out later that day, announcing the company's commitment to reparations and the implementation of a new diversity training program, Harleen knew she had made the right decision. The company was being forced to reckon with its actions, and for the first time, the people at the top were being held accountable. Harleen had won, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been silenced by systemic racism. She wasn't just taking down a $600 million deal, she was reshaping the conversation about race, power, and respect in corporate America. And as she looked out the window, watching the city below, Harleen finally allowed herself to believe in the possibility of real change. Harleen stood in the front of the boardroom, her hands clasped tightly together. The once familiar faces of her team now looked at her with a mixture of admiration and gratitude. She had just finished her presentation on the company's new diversity policies that she had helped shape and enforce after the events that had turned her life upside down. The cancellation of the $600 million deal had been a painful decision, but one that had propelled her into the spotlight. It had not only cost her financially, but had also put her in the midst of a nationwide debate on racism in corporate America. But Harleen had never been one to shy away from tough choices. In fact, she thrived on them. The media had painted her as a hero, an unstoppable force who had taken a stand against systemic injustice. She knew that the backlash had been strong, but the outcome had been more than worth it. The company had been forced to confront its own biases, and those changes were slowly but surely beginning to take root. The racist security incident had served as the spark, but the movement it ignited was now changing the corporate landscape. Harleen had been invited to join the company's board to oversee these changes, a move that signified more than just a position of power. It was her opportunity to guide others through the difficult process of true transformation. The company now had an official diversity and inclusion committee, with her at the helm. She had demanded accountability from the tech corporation, and now she was making sure that accountability extended to her own business as well. She glanced out over the room, her gaze meeting the eyes of several key employees. Each one had supported her through the upheaval, and now they were all part of the journey toward a more inclusive future. There was work to be done, but she could see the beginning of something important taking shape. "This company has always been about innovation," Harleen began, her voice calm but strong. "We pride ourselves on pushing boundaries and setting new standards. But the biggest innovation we can make is not just in technology, it's in how we treat each other. We've all seen how unchecked racism can break people down, how it can tear apart communities and careers. But today we're taking a stand. We're making it clear that integrity is at the heart of everything we do, and that means standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. She paused, letting her words settle in the room. Every pair of eyes was locked on her now, waiting for her next words. It's not just about fixing what's broken. It's about creating a new foundation, one where respect and equality are non-negotiable. We are building a future where everyone has a seat at the table and no one is left behind. There was a ripple of applause from the room, and Harleen smiled slightly, but it was a smile tempered by the weight of everything that had led to this moment. She knew there was still much work to do. The company had taken its first step, but the journey was far from over. As we move forward, we will hold ourselves accountable, not just to our shareholders, but to our employees and to the communities we serve. We will continue to listen, learn, and grow, and we will make sure that no one, no matter their race, gender, or background, is ever treated the way I was that day. The room was silent for a moment. Harleen's words lingered, a powerful declaration of her vision for the company's future. The atmosphere in the room had shifted. Where there had once been tension, there was now a shared sense of purpose. Harleen had not just turned a painful situation into a victory for herself, but had also inspired those around her to see the power of standing up for what was right. She stepped down from the front of the room and began to walk toward her team. They greeted her with nods and handshakes, a gesture of solidarity and respect. Harleen knew that this was only the beginning. As she looked around at the faces of her colleagues, she felt a deep sense of pride. The changes she had fought for were not just policies on paper. They were becoming a reality, and that, she knew, was the real victory. Harleen had never been one to back down from a fight, but now she was fighting for something greater than herself. She was fighting for a world where people, regardless of their race, could walk through the door with dignity, and that, more than anything, was worth every sacrifice. The story of the cancelled deal, the media storm, the pressure from her board, none of it mattered anymore. What mattered was the future they were building, one where respect, equality, and integrity would be the true measure of success. And with that thought, Harleen knew she had made a lasting impact. The work had only just begun, but it was a work that she would lead with unwavering resolve into the future.